We are at the 2024 Toronto International Film Festival. I'm speaking to Laura Carreira. Your feature debut really touched me. I had seen the screening yesterday, and I just wanted to reach out and speak to you. So I'm really lucky that you're here. And what's really cool is you're heading to San Sebastian, and you're one of the only two first-time filmmakers in competition with big names. So just congratulations on that. That you've worked with your cinematographer now on 3 films. I think that says a lot. There's probably a really cool shorthand that's been developed between you and Karl. So I wanted to get a sense of the cinema that matters to you, what we might have found in your short films, the connective tissue between those and perhaps the feature, but also the shorthand between you and Karl. How does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like you said, it has been a developing collaboration. I think a lot of this feature came from elements or, parts of short films that I couldn't develop at the time. So the feature for me, it's really felt like a continuation of the work that I was doing. And all that I think remained kind of unsaid in the shorts because I couldn't really get into it. Mm-hmm. And obviously, for the shift, I was reading a lot about insecure work, and I was stumbling on the logistics industry, which is rife with precarious labor. And so from then on, I discovered the job of a picker, and it was from that point that I realized, okay, I think this is a really interesting job that I think would allow me to kind of make a feature out of. Yeah.
What's fascinating about the warehouse environment, specifically this one, is that it doubles the theme of isolation, I think, because you are part of a community. When you have 15 minutes during your lunch break, you get to converse, but you're very much in your own mind all day long, and it's funny how it doubles down in her personal life. So there's that interesting convergence, but also doubling up on the idea of isolation within community. So I thought that was really fascinating. So you're producer on this project as part of 16 Films.
Yeah.
For anybody who knows 16 Films, it's the Ken Loach factory. I was curious as to what he responded to when he received your draft or your inquiry into wanting to work potentially with this guy. So what was and plus what I wanted to also mention is that it's interesting that Sorry We Missed You came out a couple of years ago, and so there's not that it belongs to a larger new skill set or new reality. So I think there's a lot of interesting things. I don't think it's by chance that you guys found each other. I think it's very purposeful, and so I was just curious about that collaboration and what he responded to when he initially read the screenplay for the first time.
So I met my producer during the pandemic, and it was a time when we were living off parcels that were arriving at home a lot of the times. So I think that also, I think made the connection with the film a lot stronger. Mm-hmm. And I think when he read, it's interesting because I think we realized that as soon as he read the script, we began talking, but we were talking, about politics and about life and about, it wasn't even so much about talking about the script. We just realized that we had a very similar outlook into the world and that we wanted to transform it with our film. Mm-hmm. And I think that was the thing that really clicked, and they've been really supportive as well. They were like, we want you to make the film how you want to make it. And I think that in itself was a great gift because as a first-time filmmaker, you're constantly having to try and assert that you're wanting to do something this way, and you have no way of proving it that that it has worked in the past. So it was really nice that they have that trust.
What is because there's a lot of nonverbal in your screenplay? How many pages did it end up being the final or the version that you might have shared with them?
Oh, so they saw the very first draft, and it was already something like 90-something pages.
Okay, standard.
Yeah, it's quite detailed, even though there isn't a lot of dialogue.
Yeah.
I do like to add as much detail as I can, because especially for this kind of film, it was really hard to convey that it is going to be an emotional journey when a lot of what you're reading is she picks up an item, she picks up
picking and packing, right?
Yeah. Or she's by herself in her kitchen, and yeah, so it was quite difficult. Yeah.
I'm very curious as to your background. So you're from Portugal, so I imagine on some scale you could relate to that transition, that finding your footing in a new setting, the frustrations that are involved with that. Obviously not to this degree, but I imagine you related very much to this character. And what I really liked about your two main locations, the workplace and the living space, is that it informs us on the isolation, but also the sense of loneliness when you're surrounded by people, which is it's a very normal thing to say. You know, if I go to Tokyo, I'll feel very much alone, but yeah, it's a very interesting parallel world that you created there. So how close, what are you referencing personally yourself from that, your own experience?
I think it definitely those first years in Scotland. I moved to Scotland when I was 18, and that coincided with me getting my first job and trying to be like financially independent. And that to me was quite a shock. You know, I don't know, that part of me maybe, you know, still a sort of childlike mind was excited with the prospect of getting my first job and being independent, blah blah. And then when it happened, I just felt, I don't know, the future looked a lot bleaker all of a sudden. And, you know, I had to work so much. I was studying at the same time. The films I was watching, to me, felt like they weren't really representative of the life, you know, that I was having. And I think that separation felt quite cheated from, you know, by cinema a little bit. It was just a little like, oh my God, this is what we're doing with our lives, and we're not, like, we're so much avoiding work in cinema. And the more films I started, I don't know, watching at the time, I just kept noticing how we don't question what the characters do, and they seem to have free time, and, you know, they just seem to have space for stories. And I think, yeah, my life wasn't that way at the start, and obviously it's a new country, so you're trying to, like, find your social ties, you know, you're trying to work out your life. I was living in, you know, flats with a lot of other economic migrants, so everyone was sharing a similar position. Yeah, so I think that totally influenced the film. And then, of course, the work, I've not done that job in particular, so I had to do a lot of research. And so I spoke with a lot of bakers, and those conversations ended up influencing the work a lot. At uni, I sort of tried to do documentaries about work, and that didn't work at all. So I ended up finding a way into it through fiction.
I hear you.
But I still very much like to find out, you know, almost work in a sort of documentary way, and I think that I can do in my script.
Yeah.
And it allows me to actually have really honest conversations and protect the people who are speaking to me. And that to me right now feels like the best way of working. And I think we can get to a lot more truthful stories. Yeah.
Yes, most definitely. One of the visual strategies that you employ, I don't want to say Dardenne, I don't want to reference any specific filmmaker, but I thought it was really interesting how we almost get like a four-wall box approach in a way. She shot mostly from the waist up, but it's not solely her POV. It's not solely we're watching her pick, but it's different angles, and I was fascinated about that visual strategy, aesthetic choice. I think what it does is it allows us to, when there's many acts of sabotage, or there's many acts of rebellion, or acts of connection, it feels more purposeful. So I just wanted to get a sense of, after writing the screenplay, or perhaps while writing the screenplay, the look is very specific.
I think some of it was already in the script.
Yeah.
So, for example, the time we are watching her, sometimes I would try and mark that in the script, and the fact that while we are watching her, we would also be listening to other people's conversations. So that, for example, was a sort of visual choice that already existed in the script. But in terms of the framing, I think that was very much a collaboration between me and Karl. And you know, the previous films, they've been quite handheld. We're with the characters and we're moving. This one, there is that side, which is when she's picking. but then there's the contrast of like a very static life at the same time. So that was important, like in the kitchen, to have not just, you know, a certain aspect ratio, which we kind of wanted to like enclose her a little bit more, but also the choices of how we framed her. For example, we chose to try and frame her a lot with less depth behind her. So a lot of the times she's a character that has a lot more walls closer to her than any other. And that was something we were trying to find in the locations that we had, especially at moments when she's feeling sort of, you know, everyone looking. And
like the infamous diner sequence where she's eating chips in a way, perhaps.
Exactly. So all other characters, they sort of have the context of the fish and chips around them. She doesn't, and that to us was something we tried to like permeate throughout the film. And then the other was obviously we picked. So this was a choice by Karl, and his idea was to try and use mainly one lens. So the film is usually one lens, and we try to keep a distance to her that is similar. And this, to me, I think is a little bit about that sense of being hyper-vigilant.
Mm-hmm.
She's kind of taking all social interactions with a lot of intensity.
Weight, yeah.
So for me, it was important that we felt that intensity with her, and this distance that we ended up with felt like a good distance to sort of indicate that sense of like a little unease at, you know, her being watched.
She's taking in information, and she's also processing how she feels in a certain social interaction.
Exactly. And then, for example, in social settings, the lens would change, so it would feel a little bit different. Like she's trying to kind of gather more information around people around her. There was many things. Another was, for example, as she tries to conceal what she's going through, because she's not a character that asks for help at any point. At that point, and this was a decision that happened during the shoot, I started thinking that we should start moving the camera behind her to sort of protect her a little, because she's so exposed from the beginning that at some point it felt a little like this is a character that doesn't want to be seen at the moment, and I feel like the camera needed to almost like show some like respect or care.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, so it's quite subtle, but I think we at some point in the film we start going to her side, and we sort of stay there.
Let's talk about your actress. So what I quickly gathered is she's maybe a popular television figure back in Portugal. And what I read in one of your interviews is that you had done a widespread cast, and that when you found her, you knew that it was her. I imagine this shoot would have been non-linear, so that means perhaps all the picking and packing scenes.
No, so we tried to shoot in story order.
Interesting.
And this
Okay.
is something that, again, the producers were very supportive of, because that is the way Ken Loach works, and so they had experience in doing it.
Yeah.
So we did most of it in chronological.
So that probably helps out Joana sort of like filter. So what I find really fascinating about this character is there's one sequence where she's in a discotheque. She's in a bar, and it it foreshadows how she's going to react to certain situations where she becomes a caretaker that she wished she had. And it's really bizarre, because when you're thinking desperate thoughts like this character is, when you're surrounded by strangers, you don't want to ask for help. It's much easier when you share the load with people that you can trust. And I thought that was so interesting what you do with this character, that specific dynamic where she's able to assert herself and be what she's sort of like missing or requiring. And we find that much later in the film. There's so many great moments in this film that I don't even want to speak about it, because, but I thought that was really, really an interesting point about that character's DNA, and also the fact that when you are in that mindset, it really is a daily process, and that you have good days, you have bad days. So how did you sort of like give that perspective to this character, where it's not one thing, it's complicated and it's complex, and she is in a proactive mode, especially with that sequence where she does take care of another person.
Yeah. I think you're right. She's a character that resists to a degree in however way she can. and a big part of it is reaching out to other people, even in a way that sometimes is a little clumsy. And with anyone, especially the audience with perspective, we might look at her interactions and go a little like, oh, maybe not. But obviously, she's a character that is just experiencing this lack and longing, and is so desperate to find this connection that at points it is a little, confusing.
Yes.
So it was important to have that aspect, and Joana did that really well, because I think Joana has this sort of beautiful presence, and she can say so much without dialogue.
Yeah.
And this was something we immediately found in the self-tapes, and we were incredibly lucky to have her work with us, because she just understood it. And I think even in the first rehearsals, I immediately realized how much we could play with in terms of the quiet moments.
Yeah.
And this was something we also had a lot of fun during the editing, testing the awkwardnesses and seeing how far we could push it until it was a little too far. And this was something LA, our editor, did an amazing job at.
Who did Joanna Hogg's most recent films too,
Souvenirs and the Eternal Water. Yeah, she's a brilliant editor, and she also is a big kind of part of understanding these dynamics between people. But I think, like you said, this is a film very much about a character who's experiencing several different types of lack. Like, she lacks so many different things.
She lacks fun. She lacks emotional support.
Exactly.
This is a side note, but I found it interesting. I was evaluating where she is on different spectrums, but monetarily, it's a major issue in the film. And I was taking inventory of what she's eating. There's this sequence, I'm not really giving away anything here, but where she treats herself to pastries. And
2 times, which one?
the one where I want to say it's like French pastries.
Okay,
because the other one is cupcake.
The fancier ones.
The fancier ones.
Yeah.
But the cupcake, the way I relate to the cupcake is when you're lacking something, you feel a need to sort of like fulfill that or go extra to sort of fill in that void. But the pastry things, it's really fascinating. Like it's a sequence that, if you're not paying attention, it just passes off as an easy transaction. But it says so much about her state of mind on that specific day, and how she starts off the day, and how she is essentially preparing for something that is probably high anxiety by rewarding herself when technically she shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And I thought that we do that as human beings. We try to buffer the blow or to prepare. So I was just curious about how that shot came about. I think it's
the scene of the pastries.
The pastries, which is, again, if you're not paying attention, it's just, what is that scene? It's pointless, but it's so, the magnitude of her making that choice for herself says a lot about so many things in her life.
Yeah, I think it's also, it's the word you just said is choice. It's the first day where she maybe has a little control. She called in sick, so that's sort of a little act of rebellion from her. And now she's going to treat herself, and it's that sense of as well of like, this is the first day where we see her out in a street, and it feels nice actually, and it's almost like she's part of the world as well. We've been seeing her so isolated. This is the first time where she's in a city, and we can hear the people around her, and she can participate. And the way she can participate is to buy all these pastries, all these cakes. And that, to me, I think it's this sense of like, she's been struggling for, progressively, that this is the kind of big splash out. And it's I think it's a little bit of what you say, like that sense of like, I'm going to treat myself today. This is a special day. And I think it's also important because obviously we've been seeing her struggling financially, so for her to make that decision then is going to get questioned. And I think this is also a big part of the film because she doesn't ask for help. And I remember in script stage, this was something that was quite talked about. It was like, she maybe should ask for help. Why doesn't she ask for help? And this was important for me to try and preserve as much as possible, which then led to the issue of like, how do we know that she's struggling? And like you said, food became that way of showing her sort of decline. And yeah, I think that day is the first where she has a little bit of agency, and what she uses with that agency is, let's buy stuff.
Yes. And I find it really interesting in the year that, so Wang Bing came out with a trilogy of films portraying factory workers, and I was really, I found it somewhat jarring, this location, and it's actually quite scary. And I like how it's used here. The fact that you do day and night, that repetition, that when she picks items that normally should I don't know, jazz her up a little bit, it's like it doesn't really do that. You said that you had done a little bit of research into the picking and packing, the Amazons of this world. At what point, I imagine prior to the screenplay, where you knew that this was a staple place that would give a lot of weight to what you were looking to delve into?
I think it was very early on. I think I started almost with the job, and then it grew from there. I spoke to a lot of pickers, and the conversations were just so interesting, and it gave all these insights into this type of work. They're like, it's 10-hour shifts, they're walking, surrounded by millions of items. They have a scanner that is telling them to the second how long they have to collect the next item. They have rates that they need to reach, which, interestingly enough, they don't know what the rates are. So they change daily, and they're not told which ones they are. So sometimes some would think they've done really well, they hadn't, and other days they would think they hadn't performed as well, and they were like, yeah, this was great. So there was also that sense of like lack of agency, loneliness, and then the more, obviously, I also looked into the other aspects of that job. What is like to live that life outside of that job. I think that was when the film sort of just like existed almost.
Yes.
And it was this lack of life outside, and this was a big problem, because a lot of people I would ask, do you have colleagues in the workplace? A lot of them would say no. And this is something Aurora actually has. She has a colleague that she drives to. Most of the people I interviewed really didn't have colleagues inside that they would almost know by name.
Of course.
Or the people they would know, it would be so transitory that you just wouldn't get to know them enough to build a relationship. And at points I would almost ask, is that a choice? Is it like, and one of the most interesting answers was like, what is the point? Because someone might get fired tomorrow, or the other person might leave, so why bother getting to know them when there's just not enough time? And that to me was quite, I don't know, it felt meaningful. And then obviously also the free time. When I would ask what life would be outside of work, what they would do with their free time, I got, one of the answers was I did laundry, which then I put it into the film, and that to me again was just so, it showed the scope of the limitation of this job, that it is not just that the job isn't great and it doesn't pay well and it's really long hours, super surveilled. It's not just that, it's just that it forces you to limit your life to that job, and you're so tired after that you just don't have time to care for yourself, to care for others, and to build, a life that is kind of fulfilling and
meaningful. I wonder if that's almost by design by the actual people that built such a system, because you're easily replaceable, but you almost don't want the factory worker to be aware of the fact that you're just repeating and being I think
it comes a lot with this type of work, informal, precarious, insecure work comes with that. It's kind of sold as a great privilege because you get to be flexible. You gain flexibility so you can do more with your life, but actually what we're looking at is trying to extract as much profit out of the people they work with and giving them the less protections possible.
So this is your directorial debut. What does life, you're going to be traveling with this film for the next year. This is part of the the fun stuff for you. What does your process look like as a creator, as an artist, outside of this juncture? How are you living your everyday life back in it's Edinburgh? Okay.
Edinburgh.
So what does your everyday reality look like?
Usually writing. So, I almost think I'm more of a writer than a director because I just spend so much more time writing than directing. The film was done in 25 days, but I spent 4 years writing it. So now I think the next stage after this is going back into writing again, which I really love. So yeah, my days is usually writing, watching films, which is also a big part of my life, reading. Yeah, it's just like I at the moment have, for the very first time actually, this film gave me that freedom, the freedom to plan my day in a way that, it is work, but it's work that I have agency over, and it's work that is creative, and that this is kind of what I love about this type of work. Because also, when I critique work, there's different types of work. This work is a work that I can do, and that I want to do.
Well, I just want to thank you for your cinema. I'm so glad to discover a new voice. I'm looking forward to seeing your short films, and enjoy the film festival circuit, Laura. Pleasure meeting you, and have fun in San Sebastian, which I hear is great for the food.
Yeah, never been, but it'll be good.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, this is Eric from IONCINEMA.com. If you want to support us, subscribe below. For more reviews, interviews, film festival coverage from Sundance, Cannes, Toronto, you want to check out these guys on this side.